This poem was published in 1960 in the collection The Bean Eaters by Gwendolyn Brooks. The poem is about the brutal murder of Emmett Till by Roy Bryan after whistling at his wife Carolyn during the year of 1955. However, this poem is different from Gwendolyn Brooks's other poems because it's not in the perspective of an African American. Instead, Brooks demonstrates the development of how the Bryans were feeling in the days after the acquittal of Roy Bryant. I think the title is important in the understanding of the whole purpose of the poem because it is comparing the two mothers of Carolyn Bryant and Mammy Till, both who were extremely changed by the murder of Emmett Till. Another thing to keep in mind is that Mammy Till and Emmett Till were also from Chicago, like Gwendolyn Brooks, and Mammy Till fought for the civil rights movement after her son's death. This particular set of lines portrays Roy Bryant nervously sitting at his kitchen table, going through the stages of grief for his actions of killing Emmett Till. I think that he's reliving the murder through the newspapers and shock spreading throughout the North. Even though he's still putting this facade on the outside that represents the racism in Mississippi and the racism of the South, there's this new vulnerable side to Roy Bryant that we haven't seen yet that indicates a sense of remorse. I will show this through the use of figurative language, the negative diction associated with being distracted, and the use of both end-stop lines and inconclusive lines. So first I want to talk about technique with figurative language. And the first one that I want to talk about is metaphors, which Brooks uses a lot of. The first one I want to talk about is the fine prince, which is comparing a prince to Roy Bryant. I think it's comparing Roy Bryant to the prince because he was the defender and the protector of his wife, Carolyn, who got whistled at. But it's ironic because he's sitting here almost doubting his actions, but he's compared to a prince whose main quality is being brave. So him not being as strong as a prince is ironic. Next, I want to talk about those intruders. Those intruders representing the African Americans coming to the South and trying to change the ways that the society once was, with the whites and blacks being completely and strongly segregated. And next, I want to talk about this metaphor, big fella. This is important because I think it represents the judge who was on the case, which was Judge Curtis Swango. And from learning in history, I know that Judge Curtis Swango was biased. He was actually in the Ku Klux Klan himself at one time. So it's almost as if Mississippi knew that he would be acquitted, he knew that he would be acquitted, and the judge knew that he would be acquitted. So that's almost a way that he's justifying his actions. Next, I want to talk about kennings, which is also an important part of all of Gwendolyn Brooks's poems. The first one I want to talk about is pepper words. In order to describe the words that the North was using in their headlines. As we know, pepper is a strong flavor used to flavor something, usually to make it better. So it's almost as if Roy Bryant is thinking that the Northerners are trying to make the papers better by adding all these loaded words that would bring shock to people and that would bring sympathy for Emmett Till and his mother. Which leads on to the next kenning, half sneers. I think this is important because it's showing how Roy Bryant was acting on the outside during the trial. His mannerisms were almost mocking the trial from this description of sneers. But it's important to look at the word after, mastered. The word mastered, you have to practice something in order to master it. You have to learn it in order to master it. So it's almost as if it's a learned trait and it's something that he thinks he has to do. The next one I want to talk about is snappy-eyed. As we know, Mammy Till had to sit there through the trial and not say anything. She couldn't testify, and so this is almost as if she couldn't say anything, but she could still give those sharp glares and those sharp looks at Roy Bryant, the killer of her son. And then next is a kenning that we see repeated in a lot of Gwendolyn Brooks's poems about race, and again, it just shows how the whites would judge the blacks based on their skin color and not who they actually were. And next, I want to talk about the language that's distracted and has negative diction, which again indicates that Roy Bryant has some sense of remorse. First, it talks about how he looks at his hands. This is just a sign of remorse and guilt. He's looking at the hands that killed Emmett Till. He did it himself. And I think he's subconsciously doing it because he's distracted. And this idea of hands is a motif later on in the poem that you continue to see. And then next is mumbled in the line below it. And the word mumble, of him saying something indistinctly, it's kind of showing that he's not confident in describing how and what the North thinks of him and what the North are saying about him. He's not confident in his actions anymore. And then here is time lost in the unwanted fame. This is important because time and lost, the lost part indicates that things will never be recovered and his life has changed forever. Then the unwanted fame, it just shows that he didn't really want it to happen anymore and that he wished it never did. And then this bleeding is important in a motif that we'll see later on with the blood. And this visual imagery of the blood is important because he's reliving the moments and not being able to forget what he did to Emmett Till and all the blood that was involved, but he's using blood in order to describe the headlines, which were true, and he knew it. For structure, there's a contrast between in-stop lines and unfinished lines, which I think shows his thought process. He's going through grief and he's going through denial, and whenever he tries to say something negative about the mother, he can't, which is the first one we see, to show that snappy-eyed mother, that northern brown black. And he uses two dashes to show that he can't finish his thought. So first he's talking in in-stop lines, the time lost, the unwanted fame. He's sure of his feelings. He's sure that now he doesn't want that. But then when he's trying to justify why he doesn't like those intruders, why he doesn't like the black African Americans, and to describe the mother of the son that he killed, he can't do it. He stops himself. He can't even go that far. And that's showed through the dash and the conclusiveness of that line. And then again, as he's describing the in-stop lines, he knew it, Mississippi knew it, the big fella knew it, the judge knew it. It's all in-stopped. But then when he's talking about the newspapers and how the governors could appeal to Washington, ... and saying that they could appeal, he couldn't finish his sentence because he's still in denial and he's still trying to accept the consequences of his actions. And this set of lines in the poem by Gwendolyn Brooks is all focused about grief and reveals how a wrongdoer has the ability to feel vulnerable and remorse for his or her actions. However, I do think, again, it shows how the wrongdoer's denial, through it, there's acceptance of the outcome, and there's still that search for justification of the actions that here Roy Bryan is still continuously trying to find.